The Wabanaki, also known as People of the Dawn, once we had over 20 tribes in the Wabanaki Confederacy, and over 16 of them were completely destroyed by war, disease, and policies of genocide. We currently have 4 Wabanaki tribes remaining in 5 communities. The Passamaquoddy, we have 2 communities, one on the coast of Maine, kind of on the tip near Canada. That's the Pleasant Point or Zibayag community. And our sister community is about 40 miles inland on a lake, and that is Indian Township, or Madocmiguk in our language. And the Penobscot Nation community is more in central Maine, in the Penobscot River on Indian Island. And then we have the Micmac community, which is up north in Aroostook County near Holton. And then further north is the Micmac, or the Mi'kmaq community near Presque Isle. So that's where our 5 communities are. As I said, we once had over 20 tribes in the Wabanaki Confederacy. The tribes were, some of the names are evident in the place names in Maine, like the Sokoke tribe, the Kennebec, the Norridgewock. There is a walk every summer to commemorate the Norridgewock people, because one of the last acts of genocide on those folks was they were all, the survivors of the Norridgewock village were rounded up and put into the local church in that town, and they were burned alive. So there's a walk every year to commemorate and remember our relatives, the Norridgewock people. So in total, there are, the Wabanaki population in Maine is about 8,000 people. Not everybody lives on reservation or in our communities because our communities are kind of small. Like every indigenous population in this territory that we call the United States, we were targeted for destruction. The policies against indigenous people were ones of genocide. It's contrasted to the policies against African Americans, which were ones of racism. They really needed, the European settlers needed to exploit Black Americans or African Americans' labor to access and get our land, but they really needed indigenous people out of the way. So those human rights violations from the very first contact were ones of genocide. We suffered a lot of deaths. Between 1616 and 1619, we suffered a 90% population depletion due largely to diseases that we were not familiar with and didn't have any immunity to, but also because of war and these policies of genocide. Overall, since first contact, we've suffered over 96% population depletion. Native people in this country are the most heavily legislated group ever. There have been more acts through Congress to deal with the Indian problem than any other group. When the policies of violence and conquest, they kind of shifted in the early 1900s to policies of assimilation. And one of the hallmarks and one of the primary tools that the federal government used to culturally, it's cultural genocide. If our ways of knowing and being, it's called epistemology, our epistemologies, and the epistemicide was that attack on our ways of knowing and being. And the primary tool for that was the boarding school system. Native children were mandated to attend a boarding school until the age of 16. And the most famous boarding school that Wabanaki people attended was the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It operated until from 1870 to 1918. And in that time, over 10,000 indigenous children from across the country were taken from their homes and their communities and brought to Pennsylvania to live at this school. They were stripped of their identity. As soon as they arrived, their hair was cut. Their clothing was changed. They were forbidden to speak their language. They were forbidden to communicate or even make eye contact with their family members that were there. They suffered abuses, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. The mission of the founder of that school, Henry Richard Pratt, he was a Baptist and he was a military man, and he was very well connected in the United States, and he had a lot of wealthy supporters. And his mission was to kill the Indian to save the man, and in this case, save the child. So children that attended that school didn't have any joy. They didn't have any love. And when they would return home after years of being there, some of them went to school when they were 3 or 4 years old, and they didn't return until they were adults. They returned with the scars of the trauma that they suffered, and also the effects of that cultural genocide.